All right. Hello and welcome everyone to today's virtual workshop series. You are going to be hearing from the DiJulius Group's Vice President of Consulting, Dave Murray, and he is going to be discussing all of the tips and tricks on presentation skills to get ahead in the corporate world. Before I turn it over to Dave, just a few things I wanted to mention. There are two different ways that you'll be able to communicate with us today while Dave is presenting. If you have any questions in regards to what happens next, follow-up information, technical questions, please feel free to use the chat. I will be monitoring that the entire time Dave is presenting, and I'm here to help. And then Dave will be taking live questions at the end of his presentation. So any question that you would like him to answer live at the end of his session, you can go ahead and put in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just a reminder as well that after today's webinar, you will be receiving not only a copy of the recording, so you have it for your records, but also a copy of Dave's slide deck. So you have that as a reference tool as well, in addition to other things that the DiJulius Group offers that can help. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today. It's really great to have you all. I'm excited about this topic. I love this topic. And we're going to be talking about today is what we refer to as presentation skills to get ahead within the corporate world, because communication is so important and your ability to present is so important to your ability to do your job, to get your thoughts across, to lead, to motivate. All those things are so important in today's corporate world. So we're going to talk about that. And it doesn't matter if you're doing a big keynote to the entire organization or a large group of customers, or if maybe you have to present your strategy every quarter, or even give an update in a meeting once or twice a month, right? Those are all presentations and all deserve to be treated as such. And so we're going to talk about that today. Before I dive into this, though, I did want to just share that we have a two-day class that will be debuting. It's going to be February 28th and 29th. You know, this is a leap year, so we get an extra day. February 29th is a bonus day. How are you going to use your bonus day? Here's an opportunity to use it working on yourself by coming to our two-day session that is focused on your presentation ability. In that class, we're going to go deeper into everything that I talk about today, but then you also have time to work on one of your presentations, to actually work on it and then present it and get that practice of presenting in front of a group. So it's going to be a great class. Just wanted to throw that out there to be thinking about it as I'm talking about some of these concepts. I'll have more information at the end of this session if you're interested in learning more about that class. So here's our agenda for today. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the common pitfalls of slide usage. So we'll talk about what they can look like. We're going to talk about crutch words, things that we kind of lean on when we're giving our presentation. Bullet number 3 is what's in it for me, right? And that's from the audience perspective. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Do your prep work. Being prepared, we'll chat about that a little bit. Again, even if it's a kind of a quick one-off meeting or an update, we want to be prepared well. Don't say too much, which might sound a little counterintuitive to this presentation, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then really talking about your opportunity to deliver sense of purpose. It's such a great way to really unite a team, motivate a team, like I said already, etc. So that's our agenda for today. Those are the things we're going to talk about. And let's get started, shall we? So common pitfalls of slide usage. So in my role as a consultant for the DiJulius Group, I get to travel around and work with a lot of great companies. And in my travels, I get to see a lot of people present. I also get to go to a lot of conferences. So I see everyone from the most notable professional presenter to someone who is a new manager that just has to get up there and share some numbers, share an update. I see all of that. And so really what this list is a combination of things that I see that aren't even really mistakes. I'm not going to call them mistakes. They're more of missed opportunities, right? By missing these opportunities that we talked about in our agenda, you are missing the opportunity to take your presentation from mediocre to run of the mill to really the next level. And so let's start with the common pitfalls of using slides. A lot of times you have to use slides to share numbers or whatever it is that your presentation is about, to give your update. here's one of the common pitfalls. So I'm going to use this slide as an example. This is a slide that we use in our organization. My boss, John, and I are in the process of writing a book. You can see it on the bottom right hand. It's called The Employee Experience Revolution. And these are the 9 chapters of the book. And so I use this at a recent presentation. We were debuting the book and talking about the employee experience. So I wanted to share this one with you. Now, here's what happens very often, right? A presenter takes their 9 bullet points and puts them right on the screen, right? Maybe they're their 9 talking points. Maybe it's so they don't forget anything, but they put them right on the screen and they start to present, just like I did right here. What happens to the audience is the audience then picks and chooses where they want to give their attention. Their attention is no longer on you. Their attention is now on the list, trying to decide what they feel is most important to them. What's coming next? Why should I even be paying attention to this? So one of the things that I see very underutilized by presenters today, and again, just in meetings or even in large scale presentations, the use of animation within your presentation. It's very easy to use, and I'm going to actually show you some examples of how you can use it in just a minute. But if I were to share this same slide and use animations and not want my audience to work ahead, move ahead, look ahead, and not pay attention to the words that I am speaking, I could do this, right? I could tell you about the Employee Experience Revolution that's coming out in May, and we have 9 chapters. And here's what the chapters are. And I can talk about my first chapter. Then I can talk about my second chapter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As I click, I can make those appear, right? For some of you, you might be doing that already. It's very basic, but again, it is so underutilized. So often when I see someone present, they have all of their text up on the screen. And that is literally robbing the attention of your audience from you to your screen for them to pick what they want to see. So that's just one example. You click and have appear what you want to talk about, what you want the audience to focus on at that moment. Right now, some people don't love this because they like to have their list of what's coming next in front of them. There are other ways to do that as well. You can use presenter mode. You can have that on a different screen. We talk about that in the class as well. There are other ways to get around that. So that's one thing to do. Here's another example I wanted to give you. Let's say you have your list, and so here's my list of 9 chapters. But today I'm really going to focus on these 2, right? So you can draw your audience's attention to what you want to talk about by using animation, in this case, using that circle, right? So there's a lot of ways to use animation. And so at the DiJulius group, we're on Mac, and we use Keynote for Mac. So I took a couple of screen grabs here just to show you how easy it is. So this is a screen grab of one of my slides, right? And so you see up here, that is where you would select animation. Again, this is in Keynote for Mac. You would select animation up there. Once you do that, you have all these areas down here with which you can kind of play around. I was not a whiz when I started this job. I present all the time now. I use Keynote slides all the time. I was far from a whiz in Keynote or PowerPoint, and I learned it myself, just kind of playing around, coming to the screen and playing around with it. So I would encourage you to do just that. Build some slides, play around with some animations, see what they can do. There's so many things on here. You just select these. If you don't like it, you just back out of it and go do something else. Now, I know some of you are saying, and then you just add the effect, right? So that's where it goes. It's that simple. So some of you are saying, that's great, but I'm on PowerPoint. Well, I have good news for you. PowerPoint has the same tools, and PowerPoint has come a very long way in what you can do within a presentation. If we were holding this session maybe 10 years ago, I would probably recommend people get on Keynote for Mac as opposed to using PowerPoint, because Keynote was light years ahead. PowerPoint has done a very nice job of catching up. And so you can do the same thing in PowerPoint. And again, I would encourage you to play around with it. Again, this is a screen grab of just a PowerPoint presentation I had. You see here, you go to click on animations, and then a lot of the animations start to pop up right here for you to play around with. Okay, so be thinking about that. Be thinking about playing with animations, making sure what's on your screen is actually facilitating what you're speaking about and not taking the attention from you. Here's another example. Instead of having a lot of bullets, sometimes having just a word graph like this, or an actual graph, right? Without all those bullets, but something that you can speak to and share without having all those data points on the screen, without people reading ahead necessarily, right? So the bottom line here is you want to make sure that you are using slides to your advantage and they're not a disadvantage, right? Here's just one more example. This is the slide that I used to open today, and it's just using this animation of typewriter, right? So it's just a different way to look at and view your slides. And so again, don't use your screen to be your presenter notes, right? There are other options for that. If it's not there for the audience, if it's only there for you, it doesn't belong on the screen, right? Find another way to do it, whether you have a different way of your notes, like using presenter notes on your screen, even having old-fashioned notes, whatever it is. Don't clog up your screens and confuse your audience for your own benefit. Okay, so that was number one. Here's number two, crutch words. Now, here's the thing that happens with crutch words. We all have them, whether we know them or not, whether we're some of the best presenters in the world or not, we all have crutch words. And they tend to come out more frequently when we're in a nerve-wracking situation. So maybe when we're called up to speak kind of last minute, or even just in general, this was a big presentation we were working out for a while. We got the butterflies, we got the nerves, and those crutch words seem to pop back, right? So here's the thing with crutch words. We all have them, and a lot of times they are in our blind spots, meaning we don't even necessarily know that we're saying them, right? They just happen. Sometimes they're our brain literally filling what we feel is dead air, blank space, and when they just come out, right? So crutch words, if you don't know what they are, they're the ums, they're the ers, they're starting a sentence with so. They're basically words or phrases that you don't need to be in there, right? Like, well, basically, you're ending with, right? Those are crutch words. Those are things that pop in. Again, when our brain sometimes is thinking, what's next? Our brain is almost trying to work ahead. And so it throws a crutch word out just because it feels like it needs to add some space. So one of the things to do is to identify your crutch words and seek to eliminate them. So here's a list of some very common crutch words, again, that pop up, and you may not even realize that you are utilizing them. So one of the best ways to eliminate crutch words is to get some video of yourself presenting, right? So if you have some video that already exists from a previous presentation, great, watch it. Maybe record a Zoom. If you're on a Zoom giving a presentation or in a meeting and have to give an update, maybe record it so you can go back and watch it. Because again, these are going to pop in, and very often you don't even realize you are saying them, right? So here's some great examples. Throwing in an extra and. So is one that I hear very often. It doesn't mean that they're always inappropriate, but you know the difference between when using the word so or asking the question right at the end of a sentence is actually supposed to be there, or when it's a crutch, when it's a filler, right? The word anyway, and so, okay, well, like I was saying, these are all great examples of crutch words. So what I would recommend to you all, if you really want to take your presenting to the next level, would be to get some video of yourself, watch it, and look for those crutch words. You could also, if you don't have the opportunity to video, and let's say you're in a company meeting and you have a couple of friends kind of throughout the audience, ask them to pay attention. Ask them to jot down some notes of when you use that crutch word or when they see it happening, right? And then compare notes after and get those notes from them. But either video or having some assistance from some coworkers or friends, etc., to identify those crutch words can be game-changing. Because what crutch words do, as innocent as they are, they take away from our credibility, right? They really rob us of our credibility. And similar to poor use of slides, they start to rob us of attention as well, because people start paying attention to that crutch word and how often is it going to be used, as opposed to what you're actually speaking about. So that's my recommendation on crutch words. There's actually a great article if you wanted to go a little deeper. It was on a HubSpot blog and it's titled, So, you really need to stop using these crutch words. So if you want to go a little deeper on that, this is the article. It came out in 2019. It was an update from 2014, right? Crutch words aren't new. They've been around for a long, long time, as long as people have been presenting, right? And so here's your chance to really take a look at where your crutch words might be hiding and then look to eliminate them. One of the best ways to eliminate crutch words, once you've identified them, is to then pick a word that you would like to use in its place, right? So if your crutch word was or if your crutch word was ending a sentence with really, or I'll give you another great example. At the DiJulius group, we make sure one of the things we try and eliminate from vocabulary on the service side of things is the phrase no problem, right? We try and avoid saying no problem in the customer service industry because it's two negative words. It insinuates there might have been a problem. There's a lot of negative connotations with it. So when I first started working for the DiJulius group 10 years ago, I was a guy like most people out there that had a habit of saying no problem, right? I said it all the time. So I realized to myself, hey, I need to stop saying no problem. I need to figure this out. So I focused on the word. I focused when I was using it. I came up with an alternative. In my world, that was absolutely, right? So, or sometimes you're welcome. And then I would focus on using that word whenever I started to feel a no problem slipping in or coming up, right? Couple things. I was able to eliminate no problem from my vocabulary. And again, I was just kind of throwing out there blindly, right? I was able to eliminate it in about 2 weeks or so by purposely focusing on it. And the other thing I found too was that I became a little more self-aware and more purposeful with all of my word choices, right? Not just that one. So I think there's some real benefit of going through that exercise. So I would highly recommend that as well. The third thing that we're going to talk about on our agenda today is WIIIFM, also known as what is in it for me. So that is something that you always need to be asking yourself about your audience. What is in it for them, right? So being a great speaker means being able to communicate your ideas effectively. It means being a great storyteller, and we'll get into that in just a little bit here today as well, right? It means all of those things. But the other thing that great speakers do also is tie it back to the audience. So here's a picture of one of your very engaged audiences at your next presentation. See how engaged they all are, right? We always have to be thinking about how does this tie back to the audience? You could be telling a great story, it could be a funny story, but how does it tie back? What's the moral of the story? What's the takeaway? And sometimes you might have a great story that you want to work in and you have to figure out what that takeaway is. It can be done. You can do it. It doesn't mean that you can't share your best story, your funniest story, etc. But make sure it ties into the audience, what you're there about today, why it's relevant, as opposed to just kind of a random story out there that doesn't tie back to the topic of the day, the organization, whatever that may be, right? So making sure that everything you're speaking about is about your audience, it relates back to your audience, and it's meaningful to your audience. Okay, so that's one that I see missed a lot, right? Sometimes people just go off on a little bit of a tangent, tell a great story, but it's really not tied into anything that's truly relevant to the organization at that time. Here's another one that I learned early on in my career with the DiJulius group. I like to call it do your prep. And so nothing is worse than not being prepared for a presentation. It does a few things. First of all, it knocks you off your game. You could be a great presenter, but if you're not prepared, if you don't know your slide order, if you don't know your numbers, right? If you're giving an update for a company quarterly meeting and the numbers just came in an hour ago and you really don't know them, right? That shows, right? That shows. The other thing it does too, though, is it knocks your confidence down a level or two, and that shows even more, right? Confidence to someone who is speaking is so important, right? People can feel your confidence. People know when you know your topic, when you know your numbers, you know whatever it is, that you are the expert talking about this particular update, this particular subject, this particular higher class, whatever it is in your world. You are the expert on this, and that shows. That comes from prep. simple things as far as knowing the order of your slides, right? Not hitting the clicker to move your slides and be like, oh, I forgot about that one, right? Little things like that, just knowing that and how we react to those things as well. But quite honestly, for me, the most important part about doing your prep is knowing your message, knowing what you want to get across, right? And so sometimes it's as simple as you may have 40 slides of content that you have to share, of numbers and updates, etc. But it might be as simple as writing a small outline of what are the important messages that I want to get across to this audience? What do I want people to walk away from knowing or feeling coming out of this meeting? I'll give you another example. I was speaking at an event for a large corporation, a client of ours, and I was speaking later in the late afternoon. And before I went on stage, I was at a lunch, and it was a smaller lunch, maybe about 30 people. Most of them were managers and some leaders in the organization. And my host came up to me and said, hey, Dave, if you wouldn't mind, could you give just a little overview of what you're going to be talking about today? We'd like to just kind of whet the appetite of this group about what your presentation is going to be about when you take the stage later. I said, of course, I'd be happy to. I immediately went into prep mode. I knew I had about 10 minutes to chat with this group. I knew I had to summarize about 90 minutes of content I was going to share on the main stage. And so literally on a napkin, I wrote down, cover this, cover this. I said to myself, okay, this group is mostly managers. So it's probably important for them to know this, this, and this. So I'll throw those three things in so that, because that's helpful to managers, right? So it's really the process of getting your main points down and knowing what you want to communicate. So you don't lose that. You don't lose in the shuffle. You don't forget about it. It's really a way to organize your thoughts and make sure you don't miss anything. I love when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm at my best when I wing it." I hear that a lot. I used to be one of those people, but what I've learned over time is you may be great when you wing it. You may come off really polished and come off well, but usually you forget something, right? Usually you a half hour later, like I forgot to mention that, or this was a big thing, I didn't bring it up, right? So doing your prep work, at least having a little outline of those key thoughts, those most important thoughts, is so important. Next one on our list is don't say too much. Now I know this one seems a little counterintuitive for our topic today of presenting, but it's so important. Don't say too much. Practicing word economy. Here's what this means. Word economy is all about getting your message across as effectively as possible using the fewest words as possible. Here's what I mean by that. We've all been there. We've all been in a meeting where there was a presenter that shared way too much detail, right? Went way far out to the left or to the right of this topic and took a long time to reel back in, right? We've all been there. And what happens is, even as presenters, as the one sharing the information, we can go down rabbit holes, right? So here's the tricky part, though. Some of that information may be really, really important. So what you have to do is decide what is the information that really helps this story or helps this topic, shares it really, really well, but then where am I going too far, right? So you want to be descriptive, you want to paint the picture, but we also want to do it in as few words as possible. So be thinking about that when you're presenting, right? Again, if you're giving updates in a weekly or a monthly meeting, you may just want to scratch out a quick outline and make sure you're using as few words as possible. One of the things I like to do if I'm giving a larger talk or a talk that I may do on a regular basis is I actually like to print it out like this screenshot here and look at it in the written word and read it, and then literally look at where I can cross things out, right? So especially with today's technology, if you use Otter or some other tool where you can just dictate or get a recording of a previous presentation and just read it, it's way more easy to find areas where you can just cross things off. Well, that was too much. Didn't need that detail. And this is coming from somebody who used to share way too much detail. When I started this job 10 years ago, and I was doing some presenting training with my boss, John DiJulius, he actually stopped me once and said, "You're telling me way too much stuff, way too much stuff." Because I was one of those guys that, like, it was a cold day in November and blah, 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 right? And I felt like I needed to get all that imagery out there, but it didn't help the story, right? So what are the key points to the story? As my boss, John, says, tell me the time, don't tell me how to build a clock, right? So be thinking about what can go. And so again, printing out, reviewing, crossing off is usually the best way to do that. But that is called word economy. So I would really encourage you to do that. And then the last one that we talked about in our agenda, and I have a few more kind of bonus tips I'm going to give here in a second, but the last one officially in our agenda was sense of purpose, right? When you're presenting to a group, again, for some of you, depending on what your role is, what your department is, it may be numbers, right? It may be the annual report, it may be a quarterly report, it may be numbers heavy. But when you're presenting, there's no better way to deliver that sense of purpose than in a presentation, specifically using stories. There is a great saying out there. Some of you have probably heard this before. I love this one. It says, data tells, stories sell, right? So we can spend time talking about all the numbers we want. What really makes things hit home is when it connects to us with the story, when it comes back to us with the story, right? When we're able to maybe talk about a customer success, or maybe talk about a team member success in the sales process, or whatever it is, whatever your example is. When you're looking at your numbers, when you're preparing your presentation, your report out, whatever it is that you have to deliver, that data you have to deliver, where can you humanize it? Where can you add a human story? Where can you add a team member, a customer, etc., to really drive your point home and help people internalize it, right? Some people are data driven. Some people are data folks and they love the numbers and they're happy with the numbers. A lot of people aren't. So it's really good to be kind of a happy medium and provide both, and make sure that you're getting your message home and taking your opportunity to sell your message with a story. So again, data tells, stories sell. And if you're a salesperson, you probably know this already. You can have all sorts of great numbers, but it's usually those case studies. It's usually those organizations that are finding success and that story that goes along with it that really helps move the sales needle. Okay, so those were the things that we talked about. Here's a couple of bonus tips I wanted to share with you before we get to our question and answer period. So bonus tip number 1 is practice in small chunks. And I first read this one in this book. The Exceptional Presenter is the book by Timothy Cagle. And it was really eye-opening for me. Maybe you're like me. If I have to give a presentation, again, and whether I'm going to a company or even just in a meeting setting, an update, I would get it done. I'd want to kind of rehearse, practice it, and I would start from the beginning and I'd go to the end, right? Because I want to know how long I was. Am I 30 minutes? Am I 40 minutes? This bonus tip is practicing in small chunks, because what you want to do is break your presentation down into 3 to 5 minute chunks and practice those and nail those and then move on to the next one, right? So if you're really kind of mastering that 3 to 5 minute chunk, then you have that confidence, right? And then you can move on to the next one. You might have to rehearse that 2, 3, 4 times, nail it, then move on to the next one. It does a couple of things. It helps you be more intentional with your rehearsing and really focused, and not thinking about I have to come back to this and remember that from 20 minutes ago, right? So it helps that. But the other thing it does too, we've all been in this situation where maybe your boss comes to you and says, hey, I know you're presenting your quarterly numbers today. We ran a little over. Can you cut 10 minutes out? Right? You're like, yeah. But now based on rehearsing in chunks, what you could pull out, what you could skip over. Just pull out one of those 5 minute chunks, right? So it serves a couple of purposes, and can really help you build your confidence of being in front of that audience. Speaking of being in front of audiences, that's point number 2, get in front of audiences, right? So if you want to become a better presenter, one of the best ways to do it is to present, right? So again, whether it's in a meeting setting or literally presenting from the front of a room with slides behind you, do that as often as you can. If your story allows, if your presentation allows to go in front of random audiences like Rotary clubs, then do it. Or if there's content that you can present in that fashion, go ahead and do it. You may want to join a Toastmasters where you learn to think on your feet and really do a little improvisation in your speaking, etc. So that's another thing to think about. Practice, practice, practice whenever you can. And there's no better practice than actually being in front of an audience to do that. And then the last bonus tip I have is use pace elements. So here's what pace elements are. Pace elements refer to your pace, right? So you're speaking, how quickly you speak. But what pace elements do is it changes it up. And so here's an example. The recommendation is to use a pace element every 10 minutes or so. A pace element could be showing a video. A pace element could be as simple as saying, okay, everybody, by a show of hands, who thinks these numbers are pretty good, right? So it's doing something other than you just presenting to your audience to change things up a little bit, to change the pace up a little bit. And the recommendation is to do that about every 10 minutes or so. It could be something in your slides as well, whether it's something funny, a little joke. There are several ways to do that, but that's another recommendation. So if you know that you are going to be speaking for any reason for 30 minutes, then plan on trying to use 3 pace elements. And again, it could be as simple as a question to the audience. Hey, we're 10 minutes in, just real quick. What do you think about this, or this, right? And it's different than saying, does anyone have any questions, right? It's more of getting people engaged, because asking people, do you have any questions? That doesn't necessarily engage them. Maybe a person or two does, and they are engaged and they do raise their hand, but it doesn't engage the entire audience, as opposed to putting it back on them, putting a question their way and having them have to think about it. Okay, so those are our 3 bonus tips. And before we go to questions, I mentioned the Employee Experience Revolution, the book that John and I have coming out in May is the scheduled date right now. If you have any interest in that, since you saw the table of contents a few times, the 9 chapters that we have, there is a link. You can take a QR code. You can take a photo of that and go to the link to pre-order if you want. And then the other important thing that I wanted to share was the class that I talked about, right? So the presentation skills to get ahead in the corporate world. It's a 2-day session. And again, it's going to be on February 28th and 29th. So take advantage of that bonus day we get this year. It only happens every 4 years. Use that 29th to your advantage to work on you. So those 2 days, you'll have the opportunity to really dive deep into some of the things we talked about, plus a lot more that I wasn't able to get to today. Plus, working together with colleagues, with fellow classmates to really dive into your presentation and build your presentation and work on some of the things like we talked about, like playing around with animations, looking for your crutch words, et cetera, et cetera. So that's February 28th and 29th. And with that, let's open it up to questions. I know we got a couple, right, Lindsay?
You got it. All right. So first one we'll start with. Victor would like to know if you have any advice on nonverbal communication and body language during presentations.
Yes. And it's interesting. This webinar was presented from the standpoint of common oversights that we see, right? So areas of opportunity that people miss, right? So that's why the 5 things we talked about were things that are pretty simple. If you put some time and effort in, then you could change them. There are other rules of thumb about presenting, about your body language, even movement on stage, right? For example, if you're in front of a group and you're speaking and you're talking about something in the future, you should look to your right, because we view the right to our future. If you're talking about the past, that should be to your left, right? So there are a lot of things that we could dive into, but I would say, Victor, the best advice I could give you for confidence on stage or in front of a group is to be standing with your hands at your sides and using your hands as part of your communication, but not too much, right? Some people are very, I use my hands a lot. I like to use my whole body to tell the story. Some people don't. Find your comfort, but remember to stand straight. And one other thing that I will share with you that it has really helped me out quite a bit is move with purpose, right? Don't just move to move. Don't just move because you like to pace. Like for those of you that are around my age, I'm in my 50s, right? I grew up with a house phone that was on a cord, right? And so when I was on the phone with somebody, I could only go so far, and I would just kind of pace in my kitchen while I was talking on the phone, right? And I think that's where I developed the habit. When I speak, I tend to move. That's distracting, right? That's poor body language, unless the movement is supporting your words, your topic, your presentation, right? So move with purpose. Only move when it really supports what you're doing, when it emphasizes what you're doing. Try not to move just for the sake of moving.
Perfect. All right. So next question actually is more in regards to follow-up. So they asked how they get a copy of the presentation. So anyone who registered, whether they were able to join us live today or not, will get a follow-up email. It'll come from my email address. It will give you a video recording of Dave's presentation, his slide deck in PDF form, and then additional resources about the workshop in February and how to contact us and reach out and to who. So you have all of that information coming to you either by the end of day today or first thing tomorrow morning. So you definitely will get all of that information all in one email. And I did mention in chat, in case you didn't see it, the HubSpot article that Dave referenced, I will include in that follow-up email as well. So this way you'll have it given directly to you.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay.
Of course. All right, let's see here. How do we get a copy? I got that one. And then any tips on managing nerves before a presentation? Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, so couple things on that. First off, I'm sure you've heard this before. Nerves are good, right? Having nerves, having that feeling, having those butterflies. You hear a lot of people saying if the butterflies are gone, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it anymore, right? Maybe it's not the right thing for you to, because you maybe you've lost your passion. So having some degree of nerves is helpful, right? It kind of gets us on our game, gets us focused. So that's a good thing. But what I will mention about nerves is, for me, the best way to combat nerves is my own confidence, right? And it goes back to that bullet number 3 of do your prep work, right? If I'm confident in my knowledge of my content, my slides, my presentation overall, nerves are like adrenaline, right? It gets me going. It kind of gets me in the right mood, but it's not overly where I'm concerned about the outcome, right? And there's a difference there. And I used to be like that when I started in this business and had to present in front of groups, and I wasn't used to doing that on a regular basis. I had a lot of nerves, and I just had to fight through it. But what I found was the more confident you feel in yourself, and especially your content, then the better off you are.
Perfect. All right. Those are all of our questions that were submitted. So thank you everyone for taking time to join us today. Again, you'll get a follow-up from us with all of the information that we discussed, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.